Good afternoon, everyone. Our next panel is entitled Market Data Licensing and Policies, the Ins and Outs, Twists and Turns. Moderator today is Rafah Hanna, Director of Rafah Hanna Ltd. Our panelists will introduce themselves in a moment, though I'll first give them a brief introduction. We have here today Richard Barden, Director, Market Data Sales for Europe at Cboe Global Markets, James McKeone, VP, Head of European Data at Nasdaq, Paula O'Donnell, Vice President, Market Data and Services at Deutsche Boerse, and Mazhar Saleem, Sales Director, Enterprise Data Solutions at Refinitiv. Let's give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. The point of this panel is that market data has become the lifeblood and is the lifeblood of pretty much everything that everybody's doing downstairs, whether you're an exchange, whether you're an LP, whether you are a broker, whether you're a vendor. The data cycle never stops. It's never not valuable to somebody or something, as we know now. It's machines versus people there. So we wanted to go through the market data licensing and the policies and ask your opinions, because between you, the three exchanges here, you have an enormous amount of users, an enormous amount of machines using it, and many other ways of using it. And then the unique factor of Maz at Refinitiv is, he is the person in the middle, or Refinitiv is in the middle. How do they manage to make sure that they go through that life cycle properly? So, people want to know about innovation. They want to know about a value add from you. Exchanges are no longer, most of the monopolies. There are alternatives available these days, be they good or bad, but there are alternatives, is the genesis of it. And so how has this produced innovation? How has this created a different set of a mindset between things? So I think the first thing is really, when people look at market data, they see licenses, they see policies, these reams of documents sometimes, written years and years ago, but they don't apply to them. So the question is market data licenses really the new voicemail? And I very much welcome all of your views as to this, and is it too static? How have you moved with the times and the type of user? So, James, if you want to invite you to... Thank you.
Is it turned on already? Great. I don't think it's a new voicemail, whatever that is. I think, when you look at policies from market data vendors and exchanges, it can be tempting to say that they don't change and that they're stale. But, working every day in market data, I can assure you that there's a lot of innovation. We really spend our time making sure that our policies fit the different use cases there are in the market, and things change really quickly. When you look in our policy and see something, for television channels or some kind of technology that you might not think is relevant anymore to market data, for sure we still have customers to whom that's important. And I think that's the thing, that exchanges always kind of walk a tightrope between complexity and innovation, because we want to be agile and we want to help people to get data into their use case. But when you do that, you might add 3 or 4 pages to the policy and the price list, and then you sort of go back to the question of, are you too complex? But I think actually we're very agile. And if I look at Nasdaq in particular, agility, I would say, is over the last couple of years we've added policies for CFD providers, for example. Prior to that, you couldn't use our data to make CFDs. Now you can. Now it's quite easy to do. We had a lot of add-on data. It's not just price data. And I think that's an example of exchanges talking to customers, understanding what their needs are, and reacting in a way that's good for everyone.
Right. Thank you very much. Paula, what's your opinion, please?
Yes, obviously, I completely agree with what Richard has said, but also I think the fact of trying to carve out policies for specific use cases sometimes does take a little bit of time, and also needs to engage with the market ahead of that to try to keep up with, or at least to get ahead of the curve is difficult, but at least to try to keep up with the demand that what the data is required for. And I think CFD providers in particular have one area that we looked at, a good few years ago, to try to find a sort of a hybrid policy that would fall not within obviously market data distribution itself, and not within non-display. So to find a hybrid model that worked for those particular use cases, which we continue to try to evolve it and to engage with the market.
That's good. I mean, Richard, your exchange has been born out of innovation in many ways, particularly on the European side and the US side. What's your opinion about the innovation factor?
So yeah, as you say, I mean, we're a relatively new exchange, and we have tried to keep that spirit of innovation going. I think it's sometimes difficult for exchanges, when you're trying to innovate, to keep the balls I was going to use a terrible metaphor then, which I won't. It can be difficult to innovate.
Keep the plate spinning.
That's what I'm trying to do at the moment, and probably failing miserably. You also have, regulatory issues to contend with in terms of certainly the tradable products, which then obviously flow into data. So we have to keep that in mind. But we have always tried to, as a new exchange, we don't have any great brand heritage. So we have found that we've always had to innovate. We have tried to be disruptive as well as part of that innovation. And that's certainly been borne out in some of the market data policies and pricing that we've put out there. We have a range of different policies that we created at the behest of our customers. So we now have a wide range of derived data policies. And we're looking at new variants of that. There's a lot of talk downstairs about fractional shares. So again, I can see, us, having to review our current policies in that regards and seeing, are they fit for purpose, or do we need to adapt them for this new use case? And that will never change. We've been very acquisitive as well as an exchange, so we seem to be buying a new exchange every week. So we just bought a Canadian equity exchange, NEO, this week. So again, we'll be looking to add that market data content into our policies going forward.
Thank you. Maz, you are in a hybrid, unique position in that you started out as Refinitiv, most recently, and now it's part of the London Stock Exchange Group, LSEG, there. So how are things developing, but also because you are effectively the agent in the middle, so the supplier from the wholesalers to how is that affecting you in terms of licensing? Because you're managing both sides effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for anyone who may not be familiar, we're effectively the old Thomson Reuters data feeds and data and finance and risk business that we now sit as part of the London Stock Exchange Group. So indeed, effectively we're a hybrid because we've got the Refinitiv business, which is your aggregation business, alongside the exchange. But to be open with you, there's actually a very clear Chinese wall between those two businesses. And so everything I talk about here today will be from a Refinitiv perspective rather than from a London Stock Exchange perspective. And so linking to the question at hand regarding innovation, I'd say over the last 10, 15, 20 years, within the vendor consolidation space, we've had to respond, no different to what we've heard from the direct exchanges. We've had to respond. We used to be the kind of business where the exchange, where the feed business was very much connected to the desktop business. And it was all about display applications, raw feeds, and so on and so forth. And over time, we've seen, the rise in machine trading, black boxes, algorithms, and so on and so forth. We've seen, what most people are doing over here, where it's regarding, your CFDs and your downstream sort of retail brokerage. That kind of redistribution and derivation licensing is something that we've had to respond to, and we have done. And even today, it's really interesting because there's lots of innovation even in this building today. And so we're continuing to do that.
That's a very good answer. I mean, it leads us to one of the most often asked questions for whether you're a vendor or an exchange, which is, why don't you have a standard license that we can all sign? But more, I think equally important is why is there not a movement? Because there are various bodies that we're all members of, FISD and so on. Why is there no movement towards that, given that there is a sensible approach to it? And it's not an unreasonable question to ask. So I think, Paul, if I can start with you, please.
Sure. Whilst there may not be a standardised agreement as such, I think there is quite a lot of standardisation in terms of perhaps definitions in our contracts or structure, particularly with maybe CFDs is a good one, where there are similarities between the various exchange agreements. And we do encourage, certainly within FISD and other industry bodies, we do encourage maybe some newcomers to come in, not to reinvent the wheel and not to create an entirely new policy around where something exists already. We at Deutsche Boerse have obviously a number of exchange partners around the world, and we obviously roll out our policy with them as well, so broadening their interest to customers as well. Like Bombay Stock Exchange, for example, is a recent one added to the CFD licensing, where there is the beginning of some quite interesting demand there, I think.
Thank you. James, may I invite your views, please?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's the part that we're private entities and completely separate, and so we all have our own different contracts that need to be signed. But I think in terms of the harmonisation, I think that's the key part. If you look at the efforts that ESMA are making now to harmonise terminology, to make some of our disclosures harmonised across exchanges, I think that's really positive, and I think it will result in, it will be positive for people who are working in market data to be able to understand. But obviously Europe is not an island. We also have the rest of the world that continue to do it a different way. But I think there are efforts underway from FISD and others to look at that, and I think we would welcome that.
Just to explain about this acronym FISD for those who don't know, it's a body where banks, so users, exchanges, and vendors and index providers, more latterly, get together and they discuss in different constituency groups market data related matters. It has been going for more than 2 decades, so it's a well honed group of people. Just to explain to everybody.
Yeah, and maybe just to finish, I think the thing you have to be careful of is not to squash innovation by harmonising agreements. I think all the exchanges offer slightly different variations that fit their local customer use cases. I know for us in Scandinavia, we have licenses that fit our clients' needs for their local regulatory requirements. And what you don't want to do is have such a tight agreement that you're all offering the same, but it's a limited subset, and that takes away innovation. I think that's important.
Thank you very much, James. That was excellent. Richard, from your point of view, what's your view on all this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with James that I don't think you can have a one-size-fits-all policy here, because the very nature of that would squash a lot of the innovation and a lot of the specific policies that you may have for certain constituencies amongst your user groups. As James was saying, they put in particular policies in place for certain parts of their Nordic clientele.
But sorry, I just want to challenge that from yourself and James, because years ago I was sitting in that position as well there. But one of the counter arguments, sort of representing sort of the user type, is that they want to know that they're signing things that are generic and that there is no other. I mean, we all have level playing fields, correct, granted, there, but they would like to know that their voice is being listened to. And as there's demand for something, perhaps, I mean, one of the downstairs, one of the CEOs of the brokers was saying, well, why can't they just have a base boilerplate and then they build product sets on top of that? In that respect. So I don't think it's, from one point of view, it's not stifling innovation. It's an input into the next generation of product offering and licensing. But sorry to cut you off. That just giving an alternative view. That's all.
Again, I mean, it would be lovely for us all to sit here and agree that all of our policies and licenses were the same and could therefore fit a uniform agreement, but unfortunately that's not the case. It's not the case with the brokers downstairs as well. I'm sure they all have very different sets of terms and conditions,
yes,
definitions, and In some ways, they won't want to change some of that because they'll feel that that may give them a competitive advantage in some cases, or that's a particularly unique element of their offering, and therefore they don't want to remove that for obvious reasons. We as a group are of exchanges. I'm talking about Cboe here, not the exchanges on stage. We've grown through acquisition, substantially over the course of the last 2 years. So, at the moment we have a number of different market data agreements. So, we recognise that's not ideal. So we're going to try and harmonise that ourselves. And it may well be that if you roll that idea forward, especially with exchange acquisition, maybe in 5 years' time there will be 3 or 4 exchange supergroups. And at that point, maybe then it might be simpler to get these exchange supergroups around a table and say, can we agree some sort of, boilerplate, as you put it. But I think until then, we are all trying to work together towards, harmonising certain terms and policies, because I think we all recognise it's in our common interests to have some definitions that we all agree on, because it makes everyone's life simpler. But, unfortunately, we are all working for different companies. And until such point as we all are working for a very small group of firms, I think we're still going to hit the same issue with our clients, which is, unfortunately, yes, our terms, our policies will be different to exchange X, Y, and Z.
And I think you're right in that, and I agree with James and with Paul as well, and that you're going to have these exchange, super groups, if you like. But there are some that are, for example, the US market. It was very traditional, and there with the NYSE and with Nasdaq and so on. And now there's the Cboe and others there. But for example, with Germany, it's a federal system of regional exchanges, all harmonized into one. So the structure of each market is different, is the point I'm trying to make. I mean, you're from a vendor side. How are you influencing or trying to influence the exchange side, but also what pressure you're under from your own clients?
So I'm going to answer the second part of that first, because I think that's a great place to start. The grass can often be greener on the other side. So in this case, what we're asking is for standardization. But with standardization comes inflexibility. Now, that's inflexibility in terms of processes, licenses, and commercials. And that the last of those three is always the one that piques the interest, right? So in the end, as a market data provider, we have contracts for all sorts of use cases, treasuries and asset management and all sorts, right? If we were to put together a contract that covers all of those industries and all of those use cases, then naturally you're going to find yourself in a position whereby you're paying for things that you don't want to pay for, right? Now, the other side of that is naturally the flexible side, and that's actually the approach we take right now when it comes to use cases. We have a set of use cases that exist already. On the whole, we try to match those licenses and use cases with the standard norms that the exchanges have. So, for example, when it comes to derived data, when it comes to black boxes, and so on and so forth. But we don't try too hard to go and influence that. We try to make it easy so that it's consistent, but then we sort of leave the exchanges to it on the whole.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to ask if there's any questions from the audience and based on what they've heard, or any comments you'd like to make. No, stunned silent. It's all clear. There'll be an exam after this. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
They're all still awake, which is a good sign so far.
And by the way, Richard Barden and I have not colluded on our suits, by the way. So, and as you can see, I'm slightly giving him a harder time than all my other friends on the panel, just for that. No, it's not true. A much harder time.
Our meeting of the group at the Bear Club is afterwards.
So, Maz, I'd like to ask you in terms of policies as a vendor that you have. How do you come up with these policies? How do you test them? How do you refine them? How do you sunset others, innovate with others? Because as you say, you have, I don't know, it's tens of thousands of usage cases. there. And as I think we're all agreed, you can't have a uniform definition of what a use case is. We can agree what a terminal may be and an end user is, what the unit of count is, but it's impossible within a treasury environment. I think you gave an example. So how are you moving forward with that as Refinitiv becomes bigger and bigger and part of a group? What's the idea there?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the way in which we evolve our policies is demand driven. As our customers come to us with different requirements, our first attempt is always going to be, well, can it fit into the existing blocks that we've got in place? If it doesn't, then actually we're quite good at customizing. But then if we see the same thing repeated, then we look to make it more structured so that you're not... Because, ultimately the end is the same, right? The end is the client receives the service and the rights around the service that are necessary for them to run their business. But it's the journey, right? And so, really, in short, that's how we get there, right? We then standardize, we put writing into place, and we turn that into a use case such that it can be off the shelf.
Thank you. That's a great answer. James, I'd like to ask you sort of a little variant of the question, because an exchange versus a vendor answer will be slightly different in that how are you adding value to the policies? You said earlier that you've created a policy for CFD usage, and you speak from the Scandinavian view, of course, just to make that clear to everybody. So where is the value add that you're seeing in these markets?
Yeah, well, I think it just goes back to the flexibility. Customers come with a different use case and say, we would really like to add data to this particular type of technology. We think it has this value. And we go away, and as much as possible, we try to find a way to add that to our policy. It's very rare that we would prohibit that, or that we would say no to at least looking at it and working on it. And obviously we have to think about level playing field, make sure that it doesn't affect other customers. But I think in terms of how we've added it for CFD providers specifically, we didn't have a policy in the past for CFD providers. We had a group come to us and say, look, we would like to use your data, but we can't because you don't specifically allow this. And we added a policy. And actually, I think in terms of complexity, it just came to me as you were speaking. If you're a CFD provider, it's one price. There's no variability for CFDs. So it's actually not complex at all, other than signing a contract and paying the bill every month. I think that's pretty much it. And I think that's the innovation that we add, is helping customers to meet their objectives in as easy a way as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Good answer. Paula, what's your view?
Yes, I think what we've tried to do is also try to reduce the administrative side as much as we can. And so we've allowed different ways to license with us, either directly with a contract with the exchange, but also via an existing contracting party if the structure of the relationship permits. So we've tried to offer these two options, because we appreciate that wading through many exchange agreements is fairly laborious, and ours is not one of the shorter ones, I'm afraid, at the moment.
Agreed. Richard, is this something that you think that will evolve? Let me give you an example. In today's world, we're seeing online trading services, not just brokers, but wanting access to open access market data in real time. We're seeing the model of paying per user really evolve into people wanting enterprise licenses, because in many ways, if I have a 250,000, 500,000, 1 million users that I'm paying $1 a month for example, I can't do that because it takes up a lot of the margin of the subscription fee. So are enterprise license fees something that I know that you have them, James, I know that obviously, Richard, you have them, but is that something that you see getting bigger and eclipsing and encapsulating more products?
Potentially. It's obviously been driven by the frenetic pace of growth in retail trading over the course of the last 2 years. We've had various kind of licenses that allow much broader use of our market data in various unrestricted ways. So, as an example, we created a range of what we call digital media licenses that are specifically designed to allow real-time market data to be used in a non-trading capacity, but in an unlimited basis. Those are becoming increasingly popular, both by financial information providers, I should say portals, not financial information providers like Refinitiv. We're back to terminology, aren't we? But also, we're seeing that the non-trading elements of brokerage sites are increasingly interested in that as a way to attract users. And we're seeing that as well play out in terms of then a path that a lot of firms are moving from, say, 5-10 years ago had end-of-day data, then they moved to delayed data, now they move to real-time data. Now they're feeling the pressure from firms, a lot of whom are here, so investing.com, for instance, who have an enormous amount of free real-time market data. They're again being pushed down that path of saying, well, we have to compete with these firms, therefore we need to utilise policies like that. And there may well be some new policies that we can't think of yet that will be driven out at what's happening here today.
We have the traditional model of password protected there, which has been around forever. Today, as you've mentioned, investing.com and others, their peers, and who are attracting users, millions and millions of them, through the search engines, through providing real-time data on the web, just open access. So I think that there's that innovation as well. So there's the policy, the usage case, and the commercials there. And I think in terms of Refinitiv, you're more flexible because you're licensing, but you're at the behest of the licenses that you have with all of our friends on the panel as well. You can only do what you're permitted to do there.
I think sometimes,
Steady, careful.
Yeah, we have to be conscious as well. That when it comes to at Refinitiv,
auditors in the room, careful.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean outside of exchanges, there's a lot of our own IP. In the FX space, we've got the primary markets. And for other OTC spaces as well, right? We've got FXall, we've got TradeWeb, and others. So, we also have to make decisions as to how much redistribution we do and don't want to do in those spaces. So, in some cases we can be more flexible, but we have to be just as conscious as the exchanges themselves that we are not cannibalizing our own addressable markets.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a good segue, because as Richard just said earlier, Cboe in the past 2 or 3 years especially have been very acquisitive, and so not only you're buying market share, but you're buying innovative businesses. And part of the argument is that they don't go to competitors sometimes, that they're not sold to competitors because those competitors have equal balance sheets and be able to grow them as well, especially regional ones here. I'd like to ask you each for some tips and tricks there. So, we're in a private area, nobody's here, so your secrets are almost safe there, except for David Hastings. It's in there. He's wearing a mask, so he's all right. He's double jabbed. But But I think I'll start, Maz, with you. What are your tips and tricks for licensing, ensuring that you run an efficient and optimal service? There's no perfection in market data. It's all about doing the basics right, and the rest hopefully, falls into place.
Yeah, sure. I'd say the biggest tip is, and look, everyone loves a freebie, right? As Refinitiv, we're in this unique position whereby we have ideas and information from all parts of the market coming into us. So when it comes to a new project, a new idea, it's quite normal to effectively, if you're in with us early enough, to effectively get some consultancy out of us, right? Some best practices out of us, because what we can find is, surprise, surprise, market data can be an afterthought. Right? We're not the first thing people always think of. And so as a result, what we're sometimes left with is a very rigid environment into which we have to fit. Now, quite fortunately, we've got quite a flexible environment on our end, so we'll normally find a way to fit into it, but it can be inefficient. So, that would be the main thing, to come in early.
So talk to us early about what you're thinking rather than your plans, in other words. Richard, what's some advice here?
I mean, I'd echo what Maz says, which is, try and engage with us as early as you can. We've had conversations with people who almost seems as though they've had a business idea and it might involve, market data, and then we're their next call, which so we'll get terribly excited. Then we realise at the end of the call, yes, they're at least 18 months away here. But the point of that is they are baking it in early enough so that the complexities that we've just been talking about with market data can be baked into their business plans. The other important point is to understand, and this again comes from engaging early, is to try and understand exactly what you're dealing with in terms of what kind of products am I going to want a license from the exchanges, and how do I understand if they are the best fit for me, and a good comparison here is there are 16 US stock markets, 7 of them are represented on this panel. That may not be abundantly clear to a lot of the firms downstairs that there is this choice available in terms of where I put my market data business. So again, sorry, repeating myself, as Maz says, do some diligence and do it early, because it will definitely pay dividends.
That's very good advice. Paula, what's your advice?
Yes, I agree completely, obviously, with the early engagement, but also ongoing, so that we have a dialogue, after we have got a commercial or agreement in place, so that we can evolve our policies, and we can also, educate ourselves internally and bring our partners to the table quite often, because we have a myriad of international exchange partners for whom we do who outsource their licensing to us as well. And there, I think there's added value for both us and the client.
So we can see a trend here before I go to my friend James. There's a trend of early engagement, and I think just before James, you can see here, in terms of the audience, there's a transparency here, and there's an openness to engage. It's not a come and talk to us if you think you're doing something wrong approach, which was the way before. Unfortunately, it was true. But now it's, well, if you've got some ideas, do come and talk to us, because you won't be aware of all the policies and the product lines that we have. And if we can, as Maz says, customize something to you, we will, if we can. And there are no regulatory overbearing issues with any exchange as to doing that. Innovation is never stifled. Sorry, James, please.
No, look, and I'm not going to add anything particularly more innovative than what everybody said, but I think, market data is a world, it's a language. Use the resources that are there. All of the exchanges have account managers for you to go and talk to. We're not there to catch you out. Come to us early, tell us about the use case, and we'll try and make it fit. And make sure that they understand what your product is and what it does and how it's going to use the data. I think if you're really clear from the beginning, then that stops any problems later on. And then the other thing I would say is, to the earlier point, you do get comments like, oh, your policy is really old and stale. Like, okay, tell us, like, which bit of it doesn't fit you anymore, which bit is old and stale, because we don't work in the markets. I don't work in a bank, so I don't know how a bank uses it, I don't know how a broker uses it. But if you talk to us about how you actually use data, that helps us shape the policy for the future. It's actually really helpful for us.
Thank you. Final question.
Sorry, can I add a point? Because I think we've sort of talked about licensing in that piece when it comes to early engagement, but just as important is technology. Because the way in which we can deliver data to you, it can be a stream over a cloud, it can be deployed, it can be managed, it can be non-streaming, and so when it comes to making decisions around how you want to receive data, how you see the data flow working through your organization in your front, middle, back operation, that's another piece that if you're getting in there early, we can make sure that we can talk to the applications of importance and all the rest of it, so you're not having to adjust your timelines later on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, we typically, after asking the prospect, tell me a bit about the data you're interested in. The next question is normally, do you have a data vendor? Because as Maz says, without the ability to physically connect and get hold of the data, then there's not much point in our conversation.
Thank you. Final question. 2022. What worries you in market data, and what changes would you like to? So you're talking in a personal capacity now. If you could choose one change in the industry, and it can't be get rid of your competitors, but that's a bit final. But what would you like to change in the coming year? Because we only have a few weeks left of this year. So James, may I ask you, please?
Yeah, I think it's a timely question because there's a lot going on in market data right now. We have the consolidated tape finally coming. We'll get an answer soon. There are lots of new guidelines in Europe around market data. So, I'm looking forward to having those things behind us. I mean, I would love if the debate on market data can move on from cost and talking about, complicated policies. Let's get those things sorted and move on to the more interesting stuff, because talking about market data policy is, probably the most boring part of our jobs. Actually, the interesting stuff is, trying to find new analytics for our customers to understand our markets better, or, trying to see what else that we have that can help our clients trade better. All of that stuff is the stuff that excites me personally and my team, and I would love if we could just move on to that and stop this debate. Would be great.
So value add around the data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree fully on the regulatory side to hopefully get those conversations put behind us. I think partnerships and collaborations with other providers, and the concept of a client being also a partner in other ways. I think we want to be open to more discussions in that way, and try to broaden the conversation and find new maybe new exciting data sources or different ways to use data.
So we have the analytics past, more wider and deeper, so breadth and depth of content sets.
Yes.
Or, they feed into each other, of course. Absolutely. Richard?
Seem a bit hypocritical me talking about complexity, but I'm going for simplification, but from an internal perspective. As I mentioned, we've been very acquisitive. We have a wide number of different exchanges that we're now trying to bring together. So I hope to see a harmonised global market data agreement and set of policies for Cboe at some point in 2022. And also we have a cloud initiative, and I hope to see all of the relevant data assets rolled out through that as well at some point by the end of the year.
That's good. So no pressure there.
I'm not part of the product team, so I'm all right.
Maz, from your view, because you've got this brand new partnership really and ownership with LSE Group, so it's a complete, you have two giants really coming together. So it's very exciting, but there are many questions from the user side as to how this will affect them.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, that is what you've answered my question for me, right? That's what I want to see next year. So when you look at the businesses that have come together, some of the brands that have come together with FTSE Russell, with Yield Book, and so on, we're investing an enormous amount in fixed income now. And within the next 12 months, I think when you look at what we are today and what we will be in 12 months' time in the fixed income space, it'll be a very, very different space in terms of offering, in terms of completion, in terms of coverage and depth of analytics. So couldn't come fast enough. These things take time, but that's what we're excited for next year.
Perfect. Well, we're out of time. Are there any questions from anybody would like to ask? No? Lord Allen.
Hello. When thinking of your exchange, and this is maybe unfair to Maz, but certainly to the bulk of the group, what are you doing? What tangible things are you doing or looking at internally to make sure that the exchange is performing as it should? That you're offering the best execution services, that you're offering kind of the best way to attract flow to the exchange, etc. Especially as Richard was saying, there's a lot of consolidation happening, and there is now a choice for organisations of where they look for their information. Can you give us some insight into what you're doing to make your product or your brand as strong as it should be in that space?
Who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. I think within Deutsche Boerse, one of the critical things is we have to do is, market data and the trading side are separate beasts within the group. So what we really work hard to do is to collaborate with our colleagues on the trading side and to ensure that we're joined up and that we present a sort of a joined up approach to our member firms, but also to all of our customers downstream from those member firms, because we increasingly engage with the buy side, who are, of course, the natural customers of our members, and that is a challenge, but it's an ongoing one. But it's we are really getting there and making good strides to achieve that. I think we would want to make more, of course.
We don't necessarily, as an exchange group, look to. Fundamentally, we are passing on data that originates from the trading side of our business on the exchanges. So we have very little control over that, because that is down to the technology, the rules, and the members of that exchange. But what we can do, obviously, is, I guess, more from a commercial perspective, is try to benchmark our costs and the commercial areas of our policies against those from similar exchanges, just to make sure that we believe that we're still offering value.
Right. Well, thank you very much to fabulous friends and panelists here. We're out of time. Thank you to Finance Magnets for arranging all of this. Hope it's been useful on the whole, and thank you again to everybody.